Hello everyone. So our topic for today is Indices Lecture 3 and we will learn how to solve different types of questions. So we will try to go phase by phase and try to discuss each of the following laws which we learned in the previous lecture. So our question is simplify each of the following leaving your answer in index notation where appropriate. So the first question is 2 raised to power 3 multiplied by 2 raised to power 7. I told you that whenever you have multiply, you apply law 1. According to law 1, you would add the power. So 2 raised to power 3 plus 7. So your answer would be 2 raised to power 10. Remember, as the question says to write your answer in index notation form, this would be your final answer. Now, let's move on to part B. Minus 4 raised to power 6 multiplied by minus 4 raised to power 5. You will write minus 4 as it is, raised to power 6. As the sign is multiply, you will add the powers. So this will become minus 4 raised to power 11. And this would be your final answer. Moving on to question number 2. In question number 2, part A is 5 raised to power 8 divided by 5 raised to power 5. Now note, as the sign is divide, you will be applying the second law of indices, according to which you would subtract the powers. So 5 raised to power 8 minus 5. So your answer would be 5 raised to power 3. Let's move on to part B. Minus 7 raised to power 11 divided by minus 7 raised to power 4. Write minus 7 as it is and 11 minus 4. So your answer is minus 11 raised to power 7. Let's move on to question 3. Question 3 part A is 9 raised to power 2 bracket close raised to power 4. In this case you would be applying the third law of indices, and that would be 9 raised to power 2 multiplied by 4. So your answer would be 9 raised to power 8. Let's move on to part B. Part B says h raised to power 2 bracket close raised to power 5. So this would be h raised to power 2 multiplied by 5 and h raised to power 10. Let's move on to part C. Part C says 3 raised to power 14 multiplied by 5 raised to power 2 raised to power 7. Now you will write 3 raised to power 14 as it is multiplied by 5 raised to power 2 multiplied by 7. 3 raised to power 14 multiplied by 5 raised to power 14. Now you will be applying the third law of indices. You will multiply the numbers and the powers will remain common. So this would become 3 5s are 15 raised to power 14. Now let's move on to part D. Part D says 2 raised to power 3 multiplied by 9 raised to power 3. So multiply the numbers. 2 multiplied by 9 and take the powers as common. Simply apply the fourth law of indices. So 2 9s are 18 and 18 raised to power 3 would be your final answer. Moving on to question 4 part A. Question 4 part A is 14 raised to power 13 divided by 7 raised to power 13. So in this case you will apply the fifth law of indices. According to that law, this would be 14 divided by 7 and the powers will remain constant because they are common. So 7 1s are 7, 7 2s are 14. So your final answer would be 2 raised to power 13. Moving on to part B. Part B says 9 raised to power 5 bracket close raised to power 4 divided by 3 raised to power 20. So first of all this would be 9 raised to power 5 multiplied by 4 divided by 3 raised to power 20. 9 raised to power 20 because 5 4s is 20 divided by 3 raised to power 20. Now you will take the powers as common and divide the numbers. 9 divided by 3 raised to power 20. So this will become 3 raised to power 20. Moving on to part C. Part C is m upon 2 raised to power 5. In this case the power 5 is both on m and on 2 as well. So this would become m raised to power 5 divided by 2 raised to power 5. So this would become m raised to power 5 upon 32 because 2 raised to power 5 is 32. Moving on to part D. 3 upon n raised to power 2 raised to power 3. So this would become 3 raised to power 3 upon n raised to power 2 multiplied by 3. So what is 3 raised to power 3? It's 27. So your answer would be 27 upon n raised to power 6, and this is your final answer. Moving on to question 5. Part A. Part A is h raised to power 2 multiplied by k multiplied by h raised to power 11 multiplied by k raised to power 9. Now how will we solve this? First of all, write h together. So this would become h raised to power 2 plus 11, because you have h raised to power 2 multiplied by h raised to power 11, and k raised to power 1, because if there is no power then it means that the power is 1. 1 plus 9. So this will become h raised to power 13 and k raised to power 10. Moving on to part B, the question is minus m raised to power 7 n raised to power 3 multiplied by 4 m raised to power 11 and n raised to power 9. Simply write 4 over here, minus m raised to power 7 multiplied by m raised to power 11 and n raised to power 3 multiplied by n raised to power 9. Write 4 as it is, or you could transfer the minus of m to 4, so this becomes minus 4. M raised to power 7 plus 11 and n raised to power 3 plus 9. So your answer would be minus 4 m raised to power 18 and n raised to power 12. Let's move on to part C. 11 p raised to power 6 and q raised to power 7 multiplied by 2 p raised to power 3 and q raised to power 10. First of all, simply multiply 11 with 2. P raised to power 6 multiplied by p raised to power 3 and q raised to power 7 multiplied by q raised to power 10. 11 2s are 22. P raised to power 6 plus 3 and q raised to power 7 plus 10. So your final answer would be 22, p raised to power 9 and q raised to power 17. Let's move on to part D. Part D says h raised to power 9 and k raised to power 6 divided by h raised to power 5 and k raised to power 4. So h raised to power 9 divided by h raised to power 5 and k raised to power 6 divided by k raised to power 4. H raised to power 9 minus 5 and k raised to power 6 minus 4. So your final answer would be h raised to power 4 and k raised to power 2. Moving on to question 6. The first part is bracket a raised to power 2 bracket close raised to power 3 multiplied by a raised to power 5. So this would be a raised to power 2 multiplied by 3 multiplied by a raised to power 5. So this becomes a raised to power 6 multiplied by a raised to power 5. Now you would add the powers, a raised to power 6 plus 5, and this would be a raised to power 11 as your final answer. Moving on to part B. Part B is b raised to power 3 bracket close raised to power 7 multiplied by b raised to power 4 bracket close multiplied by 5. Now multiply the powers as they are outside the bracket. B raised to power 3 multiplied by 7 multiplied by b raised to power 4 multiplied by 5. This becomes b raised to power 21 multiplied by b raised to power 20. So your final answer would be b raised to power 41. Moving on to part C. C raised to power 6 bracket close raised to power 5 divided by minus c raised to power 2. This would become c raised to power 6 multiplied by 5 divided by minus c raised to power 2. C raised to power c raised to power 30 divided by minus c raised to power 2. Now take minus because that's the sign. C raised to power 30 because it's divide, so the powers would be subtracted. So this becomes minus c raised to power 28. Let's solve part D now. Part D says minus 3d cube raised to power 2 divided by 2d cube. Now how will we solve this part? First of all, you will apply the 2 cube to the whole question. So this becomes 9d6 divided by, and 2d cube would be equal to 8d cube, 8d, because the cube is being applied on the whole question, and this would become 8d cube. Now, what you will do, you would divide the numbers and subtract the powers. So this would become 9 upon 8 and d raised to power 6 minus 3. So your final answer would be 9 d raised to power 3 upon 8. Moving on to question 7, part A. 2a square upon b multiplied by a upon b square whole square. So this would become 2a square upon b multiplied by a square upon b raised to power 4, because 2 multiplied by 2 would be 4. Now 2a square plus 2, because the sign is multiply, you will add the powers, and b raised to power 1 plus 4. So this would become 2a4 upon b5, and this would be your final answer. Let's move on to part B, which says c upon d square raised to power 3 multiplied by c cube upon 2d square whole square. So this becomes c3 upon d6 multiplied by c raised to power 6 upon 4d square. Now what you will do, simply c3 plus 6 upon d raised to power 6 plus 2, and don't forget the 4. So this would become c raised to power 9 upon 4d8. Moving on, the question that we have over here is part A is 17 raised to power 0. I told you that any number raised to power 0 is 1, so your answer would be 1. Same goes for part B, minus 2 upon 7 raised to power 0. So this would be 1 as well. Now let's try to solve these questions. Part A is 2 raised to power 0 multiplied by 2 raised to power 4. Any number raised to power 0 is 1, so this becomes 1 multiplied by 2 raised to power 4. So this would remain 2 raised to power 4, and 2 raised to power 4 is 16. Part B, 7 raised to power 2 multiplied by 7 raised to power 0 divided by 7. So this would mean 7 raised to power 2 multiplied by 1 divided by 7. As there is no power, it means that the power of 7 is 1. This means 7 raised to power 2 divided by 7 raised to power 1. 7 raised to power 2 minus 1, and your answer would be 7. Moving on, let's apply another law of indices. Part A is 7 raised to power minus 3. This would become 1 upon 7 raised to power 3 and 1 upon 343, because the cube of 7 is equals to 343. Part B, minus 5 raised to power minus 1. This would become 1 upon minus 5, and you can write it as minus 1 upon 5. Part C, 3 upon 4 raised to power minus 2. So this would become 4 upon 3 raised to power 2, and your answer would be 16 upon 9. Part D, 5 upon 3 raised to power minus 1. So this would become 3 upon 5 raised to power 1, and this will be your final answer. Moving on, we have part A, which is 81 raised to power 1 upon 2. Now we know the fact that 81 comes from 9 multiplied by 9. So instead of writing 81, we can write 9 squared multiplied by 1 upon 2, which is that power. So 2 and 2 would be cancelled, and your final answer would be 9. Let's do part B, minus 27 raised to power 1 upon 3. So instead of writing minus 27, I can write minus 3 multiplied by minus 3 multiplied by minus 3, which means minus 3 cube multiplied by 1 upon 3, which is that power. So 3 and 3 would be cancelled, and your final answer would be minus 3 raised to power 1, or minus 3. I hope you liked today's lecture. Thank you for watching.